Hi, my name is Jen Dubina and I'm a museum educator at the National Museum of the United States Army. Thank you for joining us today for the virtual field trip, Hardtack and Hard Times, Civil War Food and the U.S. Army. Today we are going to learn more about how the U.S. Army fed its soldiers during the Civil War. We'll be exploring what soldiers ate, how they ate it, and we'll even learn how they cooked. Hopefully, this will show you the importance of food to the Army, also while understanding some of the challenges faced by Civil War soldiers. So what is today's field trip all about? Food. And why is food important to the U.S. Army? Or really, why is food important for anyone? There are many, many reasons. One is it gives you energy. Food can also prevent disease because there's vitamins and minerals in the food we eat. It can also heal wounds faster. And finally, it just makes us feel good. It can improve morale. Food is associated with a lot of important events. Holidays, birthdays, celebration. Whose mood doesn't improve when there's cake? Or is it just me? So food is important, not just for the Army and its soldiers, but for everyone. It gives you energy, it prevents and can treat disease, and it increases morale, all of which are important to maintaining a strong fighting force that is able to complete its mission. And nutrition is one way the Army maintains a healthy fighting force. And so how does the Army make sure soldiers are eating properly? Rations. A ration is the amount of food authorized for one soldier per day. So it is all the food that the Army thinks one soldier needs in a day to have enough energy to complete their mission. Since the establishment of the Continental Army in 1775, the Army has issued rations to soldiers. But those rations have changed over time based on nutrition research, current technology, and available resources. For example, I've listed on your screen the daily ration for enlisted soldiers in the 1775 Continental Army. Take a look at this list. We've got a pound of fresh beef, a pound of flour or bread, 3 pounds of peas or beans per week, 1 pint of milk per day, 1 pint of rice per week, 1 quart of spruce beer or cider per day, and a little molasses. So look at this list. What do you notice about this ration? First, you might see there is a lack of fresh vegetables and fruit. There's no variety either. They're eating the same thing day in and day out. As I mentioned previously, rations depended on what is available at the time as well as available technology. During the Revolutionary War, the Army didn't have refrigerators, coolers, or even unlimited supplies of ice to keep things fresh. So there was a lack of fresh fruit and vegetables in soldiers' rations. The lack of fruits and vegetables also meant it was missing any vitamin A or C, which brings us to vitamins. These are common things that we talk about today when we think about nutrition or diet. I bet many of you took your vitamin today. But vitamins were a 20th century discovery. While people always felt that the properties of some foods were important to health, they didn't know why. For example, during the Civil War, doctors and nurses believed that diseases like scurvy, a disease characterized by a lack of vitamin C, could be cured by prescribing things like oranges or onions. However, the existence of something special in those foods was not known at the time. So keep this in mind when we move forward in time to the Civil War, where once again the Army will need to keep the soldiers fed, and how it does that will be dependent on available resources and current technology. Now on your screen is a political cartoon from Harper's Weekly in June 1861, just a few months after the first shots of the Civil War at Fort Sumter. Now I want you to look closely at this image. What do you notice about this cartoon? What's happening? If you look at it right away, you can see that there's a group of soldiers marching with Uncle Sam leading the way. And Uncle Sam looks suspiciously like President Abraham Lincoln. And if you look closer, you can see these soldiers are not soldiers in the traditional sense. There are cattle and pigs and some soldiers in chef's hats marching. In addition to soldiers marching south, there is a train. The U.S. Army had the advantage over the Confederacy with over 20,000 miles of train tracks in the north to move supplies. On that train you can see drinks, flour, eggs, and things like books going to the soldiers. And if you look very closely, you can see the little caption that reads, "Reinforcements for our troops." This political cartoon shows how important food and feeding soldiers was during the Civil War. Additionally, it alludes to the complex systems needed to bring food to soldiers on the front lines. Over 3 million men served as soldiers during the Civil War. They all enlisted for different reasons, came from different areas of the country, and had different experiences unique to them. We do know from some statistical data that a soldier in the Union Army was most likely a slim young man, a little over 5'8" tall, with brown hair and blue eyes. He was also young. Union enlistment records indicate that more than 2 million soldiers were aged 21 or under when they joined the cause, and some estimates place only 10% of the federal force over age 30. So what exactly did a Civil War soldier eat? Like all soldiers before them, Civil War soldiers were issued rations. On your screen, I have listed the standard camp ration that was issued to enlisted soldiers. Only a small part of a soldier's time was spent on the front lines in combat. The vast majority of his time was spent in camp, where they spent time drilling and pretty much passing the time. While in camp, this was what a soldier was eating, and the ration includes 12 ounces of pork or bacon, or 20 ounces of salt or fresh beef, 22 ounces of soft bread or flour, or 16 ounces of hard bread, or 20 ounces of cornmeal. And then per every 100 ration that was issued, there was 1 peck of beans or peas, 10 pounds of rice or hominy, 10 pounds of green coffee, 8 pounds of roasted and ground coffee, or 1 pound 8 ounces of tea, 15 pounds of sugar, 1 pound 4 ounces of candles, 4 pounds of soap, and 1 quart of molasses. Do you notice anything different about this ration compared to the Revolutionary War ration? At a quick glance, you can see that it is larger and there is more variety, but not much if this is what you are eating day in and day out. There is still that lack of fresh fruit or vegetables too. But what's new is the "or" statement on each line. In 1861, the standard Army ration was based on the assumption that not all required ingredients would be available at all times and places. As a result, it operated on an equivalent, or what some called the lieu thereof, or the "or" system. So for example, a soldier would be issued 3/4 pound of pork or bacon, or 1 1/4 fresh or salt beef. This meant that the soldier could receive any of the 4, pork, bacon, fresh, or salt beef, depending on what was available at a given time. And spoiler alert, the soldier was more often than not receiving the salt beef. Alternatively, soldiers were issued a smaller set of rations called marching rations that were given to them when they were in combat or on march. The soldiers usually received 3 to 8 days of marching or short rations when in active campaign. And the list on your screen shows what the standard marching rations were for enlisted soldiers. It's a pretty short list. It includes 1 pound of hard bread, 3/4 pound of salt pork, or 1 1/4 pound of fresh meat, plus sugar, coffee, and salt. Now let's think about all of the rations that we've seen so far. Are there any commonalities among them? Does anything stand out to you about the items in particular? One thing that you may have noticed is that the items are loose. Soldiers were issued a bunch of loose items. So how were they carrying these items? How were they stored? And how were they distributed? In some instances, soldiers recalled a call system. In that system, piles of things like meat, coffee, or sugar were laid out on a blanket where they would be carefully divided into as many piles as there were men. Then a volunteer would be selected to call. This meant that he would turn his back on his company, Then he would be assigned to call roll, while the commissary officer would point to a pile on the ground. This would continue until all of the food was distributed and was considered an equitable way to ensure that no one got special treatment. Once soldiers received their food, they needed to store it. Soldiers didn't have plastic containers or plastic bags to store them. Instead, they carried these items in their haversack and in a series of smaller bags. Here I have an example of a haversack, which was used by soldiers primarily to carry food. Additionally, each soldier had their own unique way of carrying their food that included a variety of smaller bags to keep things dry and from mixing together. They also carried things to eat their food, including a knife, a fork, a spoon, a cup, and even a plate, or sometimes a small skillet. The other thing you may have noticed is that this ration isn't a cooked meal. It's just a list of ingredients that are used to make something. Soldiers couldn't subsist off of flour, so this meant that the soldiers themselves needed to cook their rations into something edible. And cooking was an entirely foreign concept for many Civil War soldiers. Most men had never cooked prior to enlisting in the Army. This forced soldiers to adjust to an entirely new way of eating and to pick up skills that were completely foreign to them. As one reporter noted, the process of cooking is as much a source of amusement to the troops as it was to myself. I saw the cook, his face beaming like the coals, the perspiration streaming down his cheeks, watching the huge fat mess of salt junk bubble up and down in the great pot, scratching his head and muttering under his breath that he wondered if the thing was done yet. And what was the food that soldiers were trying to cook? While some items on the ration list look self-explanatory, some others might sound strange. Let's look at the actual food a bit more closely. And the first item we're going to talk about is bread. All soldiers received a bread ration. And while in camp, soldiers could rely mostly on soft bread made from camp ovens or brought into camp from bakers in Washington, D.C. That bread was typical to wheat bread that you're probably familiar with today. However, they also ate a lot of hard bread, or hardtack, sometimes referred to as army bread, tiefdullers, sheet iron crackers, or worm castles. This cracker was made of just flour, water, and a pinch of salt. It was combined, rolled, and perforated with a few holes to speed baking. After baking, they emerged hard as tack, imperishable, indestructible, and practically inedible. Hardtack was so popular, it made its way into the popular culture of the time. There was an old song entitled Hard Times, which someone in the Army parodied, replacing hard times with hardtack. The tune went, "This is the song of the soldier, weary, hungry, and faint. Hardtack, hardtack, come again no more." Hardtack was so prevalent, an Illinois private wrote, "We live on crackers so hard that if we had have loaded our guns with them, we could have killed Sessions in a hurry." Hardtack wasn't new to the Army. Civilian bakers had been making hardtack for soldiers stationed on the frontier and during the Mexican War. In fact, many soldiers joked that their hardtack rations must have come from the Mexican War 4 years earlier because they tasted so stale. But really, most hardtack was actually pretty fresh. With almost 3 or 4 million crackers being consumed by Union soldiers, the Army had to contract its baking out to civilian bakers throughout the North. So while the crackers tasted stale, they were probably made in the last few months. And so while I've impressed upon you that hardtack was hard, that was really the least of its problems. Boxes of hardtack that were shipped to troops were often exposed to the elements, meaning that they either dried up in the heat, becoming even harder, or they became wet from rain, making them mushy and moldy. Most boxes were penetrated by flies and weevils, which fed off the crackers and laid eggs. Those eggs hatched and created networks of tunnels in the crackers. Sounds delicious, right? Who said there was a lack of protein during the Civil War? And the image on your screen is called Cracker Castle. It's a mansion that was built by an Army contractor who furnished the Army with hardtack during the war. The size and the grandness of his home gives you an idea of how much money and therefore how much product he was producing during the war. Now, what might soldiers pair with their hardtack? Coffee. And nobody can soldier without coffee, as one soldier, Ebenezer Nelson Gilpin, said. I think that really encapsulates the importance of coffee to the Civil War soldier. Soldiers drank coffee before marches, after marches, on patrol, and during combat. There are even stories of soldiers stopping mid-march on campaign to make a cup of coffee. Coffee, and more importantly, the caffeine found in coffee, gave soldiers energy. It increased their morale and provided comfort before battle. One Civil War historian noted that the word coffee was used more often in Civil War soldiers' diaries and letters home than words like war or slavery. The U.S. Army was lucky in regards to coffee because trade continued in the North. Soldiers received rations that amounted to 36 pounds of coffee a year. In the South, coffee distribution was basically non-existent, and soldiers relied on boiling things like peanuts to make coffee, which we can probably all agree was a poor substitute. Salt pork was another item that ended up on soldiers' plates. Salt pork was the main meat ration. It came from pork belly and resembled the undercut side of bacon. In camp, company cooks boiled it, but on march it was eaten raw, sandwiched between two pieces of hardtack. We've eaten so much salt pork of late that we are inclined to speak in grunts, prick up our ears, and perform other animal demonstrations, a Rhode Island soldier wrote. The last item is something that many of us might not be familiar with today. And it's a great example of the Army's attempt to provide soldiers with vegetables without access to refrigeration. And that item is desiccated vegetables. Desiccated vegetables were a mixture of potatoes, cabbage, turnips, carrots, parsnips, beets, tomatoes, onions, peas, beans, lentils, and celery. The vegetables were cleaned, shredded, mixed, fried, and pressed into small, hard bricks. A cubic yard of desiccated vegetables could contain 16,000 portions. They were packed so tightly that, as John D. Billings wrote, when put in soak for a time, so perfectly had it been dried and so firmly pressed that it swelled to an amazing extent, attaining to several times its dried proportions. Desiccated vegetables were originally designed to combat scurvy, but they tasted so bad many soldiers refused to eat them, including Cyrus Boyd of the 15th Iowa, who wrote, "I ate a lot of desiccated vegetables yesterday, and they made me the sickest of my life. I shall never want any more such fodder." This notion led many soldiers to rename the food desecrated vegetables. Now, sometimes the ration just wasn't enough, as this soldier, John Cheney, alluded to in a letter to his wife. It is reported that we have scarcely made out to get food enough to sustain life. Now, I don't know who the grumbler is, but I do know that we have been compelled to take half rations from the commissary and have for a day or two had but one cracker a day. But we never were out of meat and have almost always had cornmeal and a good baked kettle to cook in. So, we've already identified some gaps in the soldiers' nutrition. The lack of fresh fruit and vegetables, a lack of variety, and sometimes there was just a lack of. Let's talk about the ways soldiers supplemented their diets to make up for the deficiencies in their diets. Does anyone have an idea about how soldiers might supplement their diets? Buying their own food is a great example. Soldiers could purchase items from sutlers to supplement their rations. Sutlers were the 19th century's equivalent to the modern Army's post-exchange or commissary. Sutlers were licensed merchants allowed to vend things to soldiers that operated with or near one of the camps. Sutlers were selected by regimental officers or were appointed to the post by the Secretary of War or a state governor. Sutlers usually set up shop in a wagon or tent, and during the winter, they may set up a more permanent establishment like the image on your screen. Soldiers could buy everything from pies, stamps, writing paper, and even tobacco. Sutlers had a mixed reputation among soldiers. They set their own prices and had virtually no competition within camp. They were known for setting high prices and sometimes took a lien on a soldier's pay if he couldn't afford something. There was also no quality control because there was no competition. However, sutlers and their stores often provided soldiers with an area to socialize outside of camp. They often sold things like tobacco and alcohol, and soldiers would gather outside of them during their downtimes. Another way that soldiers supplemented their diets was foraging. Foraging is another way that soldiers supplemented their diet. Foraging, a euphemism for stealing, was something practiced by both sides during the Civil War. While in friendly territories, officers issued strict orders prohibiting soldiers from appropriating or stealing goods from local citizens. Those orders were often hard to remember on an empty stomach. When on march, especially in the enemy's territory, anything edible within reach became fair game. As one soldier wrote to his mother, had the good luck to come across a fine hog, which refused to take the oath of allegiance. So they were compelled by law to shoot it. After taking its hams, putting them in their knapsacks, they started for camp. And you may bet we had a good mess of fresh pork for breakfast. In Mississippi, near Holly Springs, another soldier wrote, "I don't think there was a hog, sheep, goose, or chicken left within 5 miles of where our divisions camped." So you can see that foraging was another avenue for soldiers to supplement their rations. In addition to buying and foraging items, soldiers received nutritional assistance from private relief organizations. One of those groups that was probably the most well known was the United States Sanitary Commission, sometimes just called the Sanitary. The Sanitary Commission focused on promoting the health and vigor of soldiers. In order to operate at max efficiency, the Sanitary sought to eradicate poor health and hygiene among soldiers. They helped inform politicians on issues like hospitals, medical procedures, and cooking. Most importantly, for our purposes today, they coordinated home front relief work and sought to make sure goods donated from civilians made their way into the hands of soldiers. The Sanitary Commission was particularly concerned about scurvy and its impact on the fighting fitness of armies. So they urged donors to donate fresh and canned vegetables and made sure those items made it into camp. Another relief organization took the need for fresh vegetables and fruit a step further through the creation of the Diet Kitchen. A Diet Kitchen is credited with Annie Wittenmeyer of the United States Christian Commission. She believed that providing individually tailored meals to the sick and injured men would aid in their recuperation. Most importantly, those meals needed fresh vegetables. So beginning in 1863, the Christian Commission created a network of 100 diet kitchens that were attached to major military hospitals. The kitchens had large vegetable gardens associated with them and adhered to a cookbook authored by Wittenmeyer herself, called A Collection of Recipes for the Use of Special Diet Kitchens in Military Hospitals. Wittenmeyer saw to its wide distribution and estimated that her system had provided more than 2 million meals each month to soldiers. The Christian Commission was also responsible for making sure coffee made its way to soldiers who were recuperating and are credited with creating something called the coffee wagon. The coffee wagon was a steam-powered machine that could prepare coffee for 1,200 people every hour. Traveling at a speed of 8 miles an hour, it would travel up and down rows of tents and stretchers at hospital camps. It had multiple boiler units with its own firebox, chimney, and a spigot to pour coffee out of. It could produce as many as 108 gallons of hot coffee an hour. So we've talked a lot about food. Who's hungry? Before we end the field trip today, I wanted to give you the opportunity to cook like a Civil War soldier. I'm going to teach you how to make your own hardtack at home, and this recipe is promised to be worm and weevil free. Today I'm going to be demonstrating how you can make hardtack at home. What is hardtack, some of you might be asking? For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Civil War staple, hardtack is a simple biscuit or cracker made from just 3 ingredients: flour, salt, and water. Often this cracker made up the bulk of a Civil War soldier's ration. Soldiers ate a lot of hardtack when on campaign, and it earned nicknames like teeth dollars, sheet iron crackers, or even worm castles. This is something that you can easily make at home, and it'll give you a taste of what it's like to be a Civil War soldier. And the best part about this recipe is it's easy to make and requires only 3 ingredients, which is part of the reason hardtack made its way into Army rations. The crackers will also last a long time, about 2 to 5 months if properly stored. So don't worry about eating all of these in one sitting. So let's get started. The first step is to gather all of your ingredients and everything that you need to cook. For this recipe, we'll make about 10 to 15 crackers. So you'll need 2 cups of flour, 3/4 a cup of water, a teaspoon and a half of salt, and you'll also need a rolling pin, a spoon, a fork, measuring spoons, a bowl to mix things in, a surface to work on, and you'll also need a baking sheet or cookie sheet to put your hardtack on, and then of course a spatula to get them off when you're finished. So the first step is to combine your ingredients into a bowl and mix them together. So we're going to take our flour and we're going to add in our salt, which is 1.5 teaspoons. Got my half, my whole, and then you're going to add in your water, and you're going to stir it all together with your spoon. Once you mix it together, a dough should start to form. It might also be best just to use your hands. All right, now once you have your dough, you're going to roll it out on the cutting board using your rolling pin until you have about a 1/3 or 1/2 inch thick roll out. And so if you find that your dough is sticking to your rolling pin, you could just use a little bit of flour to prevent the stickiness. And then once you've rolled everything out, you're going to need a knife. Or I found that using a pizza cutter actually works best, and you're going to cut your dough into 3 by 3 inch crackers. Now you don't have to worry about being precise. That's the best part about hardtack. Really anything goes. I'll be honest, I'm not really sure what 3 by 3 looks like without a ruler. But once you have your squares, you're then going to use a fork to punch some holes into it to help with the baking process. So you're going to use your fork and make sure you go all the way through the cracker. And you're just going to put about 3, maybe 4 rows of holes with your fork. And then you're going to place them onto your baking sheet. And you're going to put the hardtack into a preheated oven, making sure that you've preheated your oven to 350 degrees. Now these should go in the oven for 30 minutes, and then you're going to take them out and flip them over and put them in for another 30 minutes. And so once you're done with that, the hour of baking, you'll have these beautiful hardtack pieces. You should get about 10 to 15 biscuits from this recipe, and you can enjoy these at home. The preferred method is for soaking them in some type of liquid like coffee or soup for about 15 minutes to soften them up. And then you can enjoy them, or you can just eat them straight out of the oven, but be warned, they are very hard. So I hope you try this recipe at home, and you can see that this Civil War staple will give you a greater appreciation for the challenges faced by Civil War soldiers who consumed many, many hardtack biscuits throughout the course of the Civil War. I hope you enjoyed the cooking demonstration. If you are ever looking for an activity to help put yourself in the shoes of soldiers, you can try this at home. Or if you're looking for something to take with you on your next road trip. Thank you for joining us today for the field trip, Hardtack and Hard Times. I hope this gave you the opportunity to understand more about the nutritional challenges faced by soldiers during the Civil War, and that you were able to see how important good nutrition is to the U.S. Army.